J4. So I guess we'll address the first question first. Everyone wants to know, which is when's it coming? And we'll get that out the way with. And the answer is we're getting close. This is my current list of items that are blocking beta.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And you guys can always check this at any point just by filtering by the beta blocker label, either in GitHub or on the issue tracker. The label exists in the same label in both places.
So we have 4 issues left before beta. Is that because those 4 are backbreakingly difficult to finish, or just because they're going to be done quickly?
About 3 weeks ago, it was about 8. It's just the 4 that I haven't got to yet.
Okay.
This one's actually a pull request that is going to partially fix this one as well.
Yes.
But these are issues that are basically BC breaks. I don't think as soon as these beta blockers are checked off, we're going to immediately release a beta. There'll probably be a bit of a period for reflection and final call for developers to come in and start experimenting and make sure we haven't horrifically broken things that we didn't mean to break. And once a beta goes, then it's just a matter of stabilizing as much as we can and trying to make it ready for to ship.
Okay, so we should be expecting a beta version fairly soon.
Yeah, so originally the plan was our target was to have it for Jab. Obviously, with all the coronavirus stuff, that's changed a bit. Just by definition, me not having to commute for 2 hours a day, I've had more time to put in Joomla. And so the issues are going down at a faster rate than I was expecting. Plus, obviously, Jab's not going to happen in person, which makes it less of an important target than it probably was.
Yay for coronavirus.
Yeah, pretty much. There are small benefits. But by and large, it's probably still going to be roughly the same time frame because we want to give people a chance to, basically test it and make sure that everything is good before we tag the beta and really lock ourselves into the, no more BC breaks unless it can't be possibly helped.
So for people that may not be familiar with this, George, does the beta version mean that no more features will be accepted, or is the definition slightly different?
No. So we're trying to do full semantic versioning. So whatever, pretty much this. So we're doing full Semver. So Semver is major, minor, patch. Major is you make the BC breaks. Minor is you add functionality. Patch is we make basically bug fixes only. And that's by and large what we've tried to keep to now for about the last 3 or 4 years. In terms of alpha, betas, and release candidates, alphas are basically just snapshots in time, work in progress and things. Betas are basically feature complete. For a major version, we don't plan on making any more BC breaks unless it physically can't be helped. So, for example, we made a change, it's broken something in a horrific way, and we want to either revert it or fix it, and we fix it in a way that can't be helped but to make a break to something. And then release candidates is basically it's ready to ship. Test it now before it releases.
So if someone really wants to start imagining what Joomla 4 would look like on the real site, or maybe if they're an extension or template developer, then the beta version is pretty close to what the final version will be.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too far away. I mean, you'd expect it to be a bit more buggy than what the final version is going to be, but yeah, it shouldn't be materially different. And then the release candidate should be, it's give or take, ready for prime time.
So we've got a question from, I think, your friendly neighborhood troll from the London Joomla user group, asking about what's happening with the admin template.
Basically, it's sticking as it is largely. I don't foresee any more significant change to it.
And what about the alternative one? Is that one still planned, or?
I think they gave up on it. They couldn't meet the requirements that we set out, to the best of my understanding.
Okay, cool.
We might port in some of the good parts of it, but I'm not aware that anybody's actively working on that. I think, for example, we pulled in the menu creation view, the module creation view we ported into for example. But largely I think it's pretty much going to sit there.
So, George, we're looking at the new Joomla 4 installer on your screen there?
Yes. So, yeah, I guess I'll run through. So the installer is very much simplified on basically what it used to be. You don't have a lot of the options that we used to have. They're now for you to configure once you've installed Joomla, and the idea is to get Joomla installed and up and running in the shortest period of time possible rather than having to configure all the options. So as you can see, languages, site name, super user credentials, and install. And that's it. So as you probably just noticed, that took me less than a minute. So that's the first thing that we've been kind of working hard on, is basically trying to make sure that it's quick and fast to get started.
Are we going back to the JOS suffix?
JOS?
Yeah, in the database setup, I saw that it was you're using the JOS suffix. Is that because you're on local, or is that going to be going back to that madness?
Oh no, I mean the suffix has always been there. Prefix, sorry, has always been there. I just use JOS because it's my local install, and the way Joomla works is that the first time it backs you up, and the second time it just always is going to overwrite, and that's exactly the functionality I want for my local suffix. I don't want to have dozens of versions of databases sitting around, so I always keep it as JOS. Keeps it easy for me on my local setup.
It should kind of be unique each time, right?
It's got to be unique on the same MySQL instance.
But isn't it more secure to have it unique?
Yes. I mean, it's still the random thing it used to be. Don't read anything into the fact I'm using JOS. It's just the way I choose to have my local setup.
Cool. So the installation process is much quicker now?
Yep. So that's basically it. Remove installation folder. Obviously, if you still want to do multilingual install, you can still do multilingual install. Is there anybody who wants to see that? Or
question for the button that says customize installation? I'm thinking more for the UI side. It might be easier for somebody that's looking at this for the first time if maybe we change the button to something that says add additional options or something where they might not miss this, because customized installation can kind of get lost in the big overall.
Yeah, it probably needs to say. So I think this is just a little bit legacy, and this is the kind of thing that we need to tidy up between beta and stable. But like this is now just about installing languages. We don't have sample data install and that kind of stuff here anymore, which is what this used to be about. So now you've only got basically language install, and that's it.
Okay, so for at least now, maybe just changing it to add additional languages. Right.
Yes.
And may I contribute as well? Where it says remove installation folder, if I understand correctly, that is a requirement in order to get Joomla started.
Yes, but not when you've got a development version like I have.
Okay, but when somebody's doing this for real, maybe for the UI, to put that this might be a required to continue.
Yes, there's a reason why this says we detected development mode. There's different strings to show.
George, can I ask a question about this install? It doesn't seem like it's that different to the previous one. It almost feels like exactly the same information is needed. But you're saying it's a quicker install. But is there something that's been changed that I haven't spotted?
Like there's probably 2/3 of the options got removed. All the stuff that used to be able to configure in global configuration got removed.
Oh, okay, cool.
Maybe it's the same key settings, but a lot of the extra junk has been removed?
Pretty much. The required stuff is still the required stuff, but all the optional things have basically been removed.
Oh, it's removed all the warnings, has it? Wasn't there like PHP warnings you should have display globals off or something like that?
That gets displayed at the start if it's required, and if it's recommendation, it gets displayed at the end, like you can see at the top here.
Oh, okay, cool.
Steve, you have a question about multilingual?
Yeah, hi, Steve in Tel Aviv, Israel. I work in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. In the list that was displayed previously, I did not see Arabic or Hebrew in that list. Maybe it's... okay, yeah, there we go. Wonderful.
So this list is exactly the same list you see in Joomla 3. The one change you've got to be aware of is, as is traditional in all our major versions, we require fresh packs. So in any Joomla 3 version, you can install any other Joomla 3 version's language pack, but for the major versions, we basically require new packs. So for the one example at the start of the installation process, there was only the 2 English languages because we're going to require everybody to basically resubmit language strings. Part of that's just because a lot of them changed as well. There's a lot of change between J3 and J4 in terms of language strings. We've done a lot of work on the UI and trying to improve the quality of the text that we're showing people, trying to remove superfluous text.
Yeah. Could I also indulge myself to ask another question with regard to associations?
Sure.
I have usually got bogged down with menu and article association between different languages. Is there any streamlining in this new version?
There has not been changes to associations.
Okay. Yeah, because simply I did a website which had Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish, German, and Russian, and it was getting difficult to make correct associations.
What would your suggestion be? I mean, I'm always waiting, especially with multi-lang, there's a lot of different ways of running websites, which makes it hard to kind of select one. But I mean, if you have any suggestions, I'm always willing to hear suggestions. But as of now, there hasn't been changes. There was a couple of years ago a proposed discussion about having master languages, which would have been an optional feature. So you basically had a master language which all articles are written in, and then you could basically translations hinged off the master language. But that's the only thing that's kind of been proposed in the recent times.
My suggestion, although I don't know how much of a UI headache it would be, is to have associations in a kind of table format, so that we could click link between all different languages at the same time, rather than one by one. I don't know. That was just a suggestion.
Of course, so Joomla could do a better job, perhaps, of scaling to not just multiple languages, but sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 languages. That's basically your point there, Steve, that once you start adding more and more languages, it could be easier to organize. Cool. So, George, we're looking now at the Joomla 4 admin template.
Yep. So this is the new backend. Probably the biggest changes is that we've largely tried to remove a lot of the system administration things and tried to focus it more on what users of Joomla need to see, as opposed to kind of system administration things. System administration is basically being tucked away on this system dashboard on the left here. So effectively tried to split things into 2. The main entry area, which is supposed to be more content creator friendly, and the system dashboard here, which is supposed to be a bit more kind of managing your site. So yeah, that's kind of the biggest changes here. Obviously, you can still customize the dashboard to your heart's desire. We've added a section here about to basically quick add modules into the dashboard, which didn't exist in previous versions. And you can, but yeah, so you basically can add your normal modules and stuff in here. These are admin modules, yeah.
So you've moved the navigation, which has been horizontal in Joomla since the Mambo days. It's now moved to the left sidebar.
Yeah. Yes, it has. There's no.
I'm just pointing out the obvious.
We're falling into what everyone else is doing, basically. It's always controversial whenever you do anything like this. Jira have just moved from horizontal to vertical and horizontal, and it's causing everyone in my office to tear their hair out. But
I remember writing a kind of a joke blog post maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which was called left sidebar menu, black and white interface, and basically went through all the CMSs and project management platforms, and everyone basically had that kind of WordPress style. Left sidebar, black, white, little icons next to the menu links. What we have here in Joomla 4, I guess, is pretty close to the standard web interface in 2020.
Yeah.
Like, everyone has very similar patterns now.
Yeah, I think just everyone's going down the same path and the same kind of usability things, and trying to make sure you can kind of toggle this information out of the way when you're creating content. I mean, I don't know what more to say than that, really. It's just...
I think when your screen gets narrower, maybe on a smaller laptop or something, having a horizontal menu causes some real problems there. So it's much better like this, in my opinion, anyway.
I'm looking at my desktop, what I have open. I have Slack open. Slack has left sidebar with little icons next to the text menu for navigation, and then the main content is on the right side. I have Zoom open. Zoom is loaded with a left sidebar and the main content on the right. I have Gmail open. Gmail has icons on the left and the main content on the right. I could go on, but this is the approach that people are used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going to cause a nice range of people to rage whenever Joomla 4 comes out. Like, any change to, people have patterns, the way they want to use things and the way they look for things. There's going to be a change where people have to adjust to the sidebar and the top bar. They're going to go to the top bar and go, oh no, wait, not there. But I think long term it's better, because when people who aren't used to Joomla come in and try to use the product, they're going to find things in more familiar places.
I agree, George. If everybody could support George in this problem.
I don't know. I've been using the horizontal menu since 2003 or 2004, and I'm kind of annoyed that you've moved it, George. That's like 16, 17 years that you've ruined for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man.
Steve, it creates an opportunity for you to create an admin template with the horizontal menu.
There's a whole... We do some WordPress stuff like everyone else does these days, and when they put their new Gutenberg editor out, there was a whole bunch of people that would forked it, or obviously the classic editor plugin, so you could go back to the old way of working. We do some Drupal work, and when they put Drupal 8 out, a whole group of people forked and maintained the old version. There's always people that like the way they've always done it and want to keep on doing things the way they've always done it. I'm glad you're preparing in advance for all the complaints, George. So can you take us on a quick tour? What other interesting new stuff is there here in Joomla 4?
Okay, so, let's try and think. So, because this has all happened slowly over so much time, I always kind of think of the new stuff and not necessarily the old stuff. So, the system dashboard now has a lot of the system stuff, so that is not in the main menu anymore either. So if you're looking for things like content languages and that kind of thing, you're not going to find this in your main menu. You have to go to the system dashboard. It takes a little bit of adjusting, but actually day to day, it should make your life much easier because there's just less general clutter. What else have we got? We have, where did it go? That one. Mail templates. This allows customizing emails that Joomla sends. You can create full-blown templates, or you can create just like specific overrides. It's down to you. So you can basically choose to override whatever emails you want. And you can do that with full HTML, or you can just do it like what I'm doing here is just text. And you can use tags to replace keywords and stuff in your emails.
George, I'm really interested in this. Can you show us the HTML stuff? Or?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of a global config thing, but if I turn on to HTML mode, it's no different really. You just get TinyMC as your editor instead.
Oh, I see. So can we do like an override on the original HTML template? So if I want to put my own structure to it and logo and everything, colors and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just an override like a normal override?
No, not as in like an override. You still have to do it within Tiny.
But this is like a language string override or something, or?
Well, so by default, Joomla will send out your email not in HTML mode. It'll send it out as just plain text, right? But this basically overrides the entire thing, and sending emails in HTML versus sending emails in plain text needs different things under the hood in most email client libraries. PHP Mailer is the one Joomla uses. So it will make PHP Mailer use HTML mode, and you basically send out your HTML like this. You can create global tags effectively as well to set your own root-based templates that are used across all emails too. But it will replace everything. So yeah, you've got to write the extra stuff in as well, I'm afraid.
So if I was doing, like, I do a lot of HTML emails. So if I was to do a HTML email the way I would do it in my editor, for example, I would just basically paste it all into here.
Give or take, yeah, per email. But you can reuse some of the base snippets. Off the top of my head right now, I couldn't remember exactly the details on how, but it will be in the documentation when it comes.
Cool, thanks.
I know it's possible. This is obviously something that extension providers will have to implement as well. It's not something that we can kind of force out the box for free. Extension providers have to basically have to register their emails in this component before you can override them. But that's not a big piece of work. And again, documentation will come on that.
But this is in the current version, right? So I can mess around with it.
What, in 4?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been there for about a year now.
Okay.
So, George, we've got a question from Morton, and it kind of dovetails into something I was going to ask you about. In addition to these customizable emails, there's also a new content workflow feature in Joomla 4. Morton had a question that related to content creation and ACL and who can edit what content. Is it possible to get a quick demo of that new workflows feature for content articles?
Sure. So workflows, as it is out of the box, really shouldn't be significantly different to what you're used to. So what we've got right now is basically manages how your content flows between its publishing states. And the reason I caveat with this is what we've got right now is that there is a little bit of work going on in this behind the scenes that may or may not make it into the final version. We've labeled it as a nice to have if it's ready in time. So some of this comes with a bit of pinch of salt on the ins and outs. But I'll tell you how it is right now, and then if it changes, obviously you guys will see it as it goes through. So as it is right now, as you can see, you've got your statuses here like you would normally do. Aside from it looks slightly different because you've got everything in brackets here. And we'll come back to why this is in a second. But so largely workflows, if you're coming back to Joomla, you won't really notice a huge amount of difference. But now we're going to kind of go into it and find out what's actually changed under the hood. So by default, all your content is getting migrated into a workflow, which is by default the Joomla default workflow, which is everything you're used to, the published, unpublished, trashed, and archived. However, what workflows is about moving to kind of a new level of processing data. And so, for example, I'm giving the example, I used to work for a startup. And when I was working for a startup, often I'd come up with a blog post idea and I'd write it up in Joomla. Then I'd hand it over to my marketing guy who would basically proofread it, tweak anything that he wanted to tweak, and then it would get published. And workflows is about trying to formalize some of that into Joomla. So it's not an unofficial thing of, oh, I've passed it on to this guy and he's done that. So let's create a new workflow, which is a big publishing workflow. And we'll make this default for now, just so I can prove my point. And then I'm going to let's edit some transitions. And I'm going to trash this because I don't care about it. Bear with me a second. So I'm going to do this. Wait, where am I in? Am I in transitions? I want to be in stages. So stage is draft. And I'm going to have a ready for review, still unpublished, right, and get back. So I'm setting this up because there's only so much time, and I'm going to give you a demo of to how it works as opposed to all the ins and the outs. So I'm going to take that from that to that and have that. Call it that. Okay, all right. So I probably need to change this too. Don't know if this actually works this way. But okay, it does work. Nice. Okay, so right. So here you can see. I missed one thing. Bear with me. Sorry. Transitions. So started in draft used. And that's my default stage. Yeah, okay. I want to go from this to this. And I want progress.
So basically what we have is a customizable workflow. Joomla has always had maybe unpublished, published, trashed, archived.
Mm-hmm.
But with the workflows, you could add some extra steps.
Yeah, so, and you keep it unpublished the entire time, or you can move it through whatever stages. So in this case, for example, I keep my thing in draft, which means it's unpublished. I'll save it. It's still in draft, and I'm going to keep working away at it. But the point is that I'm not moving it into published, and there's no mechanism to move it to published. Either I can trash it and move it into trashed, or I can say my post is complete, at which point it moves into the next stage. And only when I say my post is complete can I move it into published.
And it may be possible to put some access control on those levels. So some people can only move it to complete, and then maybe only your administrators can move it to published.
Correct. So these are the different transitions. So I had this one, when I said complete, I moved it from draft into ready for review. And then I moved it from ready to review to published. And on published, I can say in permissions that only, so managers say can't, but administrators can.
Cool. So this should open up Joomla for more professional level workflows, more professional level publishing.
Yeah. So, I mean, in professional levels, you probably got like a lot of different options. But even as I said, in my little startup, we basically had a workflow of those three stages. So, I mean, it can still be used for smaller sites. Pretty much the only time this isn't going to be useful is if you're managing a site and all its content for someone else, and you basically just get handed a completely finished piece of content. As soon as you've got other people coming into your site, even if you're just running like a small magazine with user submissions and stuff, this obviously also has lots of potential applications.
Cool. So, George, are there any particular features in Joomla 4 that you are really proud of? Things that someone on your team has done a really good job with, or something you've been involved in, something that when you talk about Joomla 4, you say, wow, I'm glad we did that?
There's like no one specific thing. Like, I think there's no like one standout feature. There's just lots of nice little small things that should hopefully make people's lives easier. Probably like the two kind of standout features are the workflow and probably the API, because that's going to unlock Joomla for a lot more development heavy and like use cases where you've got lots of integrations.
Is that fixed yet? Is that ready?
Can you talk us through that? When you say there's an API in Joomla, what kind of API is it? What kind of use cases do you imagine for it?
Okay, so the API is It's so for those who may not know what an API is when you're browsing the web, you're using a web interface. Sometimes when you want to integrate with other applications and other pieces of software, you might want computer-to-computer communication. So a computer goes and tries to get information about a list of events on your site so it can publish them on a bigger events page site. Events happening in London or whatever, and yours is just one of the many events that they're showcasing happening in London at specific times. So they need to be able to access your data in a structured way rather than just parsing information either manually or like through weird mechanisms out of your page. And that's kind of what an API is about, is trying to give a structured view of that. So bear with me. What am I going to do this? I'm going to... Okay, I'm going to swap my workflow back, otherwise I risk doing things I don't want to do.
Could it also allow people to bypass the default Joomla templating system and have more JavaScript, more modern front ends?
Yes, it can. Okay, so when you're building these APIs, you have two kind of use cases for your API. You have kind of what WordPress does, which is exposes everything. So when you call an API in WordPress, you get your entire history of revisions of your document and all that kind of stuff. That you get everything out of the box. And obviously, you may not want to expose that on your public website when you're calling your backend of like the full history of the article. And you don't need an empty tags thing if you're never tagging any of your articles, for example. So what you probably want is you want this kind of mixture of things. You want to have basically just the stuff you're using when you're building that kind of website. But Joomla doesn't know exactly which bits of your site you are and you aren't using. So by default, what the API does in Joomla is return everything the same way WordPress does. However, the difference that we've done is that we allow people to basically build their own APIs within the Joomla thing. So you can build custom APIs for your site, which would allow you to build those sorts of JavaScript applications, if that makes sense.
So it's more, perhaps a little more customizable instead of just having the entire site running through a single API.
Yes, I think that's probably about right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install all the sample data, and then it's going to look a bit better in the API when I start querying things.
George, can you use the API with components as well?
If the component adds support, yes. So all Joomla core components will have an API. I think I'm speaking the truth in saying that at this point. I don't think there's anything in core that doesn't have an API anymore. Some of the batch actions don't, but by and large, everything does. Yeah? So one second, I'm just going to wait for this to finish, and I'm going to give you an example because it's easier to see than it is to try and explain this stuff more visually. Oh, and I'm going to need to...
So there's a sample data install button there, which kind of exists in Joomla 3.
Yeah, so all these things exist in Joomla 3 already, except they're in the installer.
I wonder if, as someone that sells some templates through Joomla Shack, if that could be used to import all the sample data used to set up a template, for example?
Yes, absolutely. These are plugin based now, and they run through PHP. So it's maybe slightly harder depending on what your level is. A lot of template developers are not necessarily heavy on their PHP or SQL. They tend to just copy paste what's there and modify quite a bit. If you're more experienced in PHP, there are benefits of doing it in PHP, which is all the asset data is definitely going to be correct, because one of the things we often find is that the asset data for Joomla and the LFT RGT values and that kind of thing in specific pieces of data aren't correct. And so by inserting it through when I say APIs here, I'm not referring to the APIs we were just talking about, but through the PHP APIs, I'm going to say, you're definitely going to get the right data being inserted into your database. Cool. But yes, the idea here is that plugins, templates can absolutely customize this list. Okay,
so you knew one question was coming at the beginning, and you tried to hit the when is Joomla 4 question, coming literally with the first words that you spoke in this session. And you knew this question was coming as well. From Hakan, what is the upgrade process going to be like for Joomla 3 users?
Okay, so probably if our website to break in the front end when we upgrade for 3 to 4. Okay, so it depends what your template provider is the biggest thing, and it depends what your template overrides are overriding. So Joomla 4 has jumped from Bootstrap 2 straight to Bootstrap 4, and potentially, depending on what the timelines of Bootstrap 5 are, we may even end up having to jump to that. They look like they're going through, like they're pre-alpha at the moment, but whatever I can do, I guarantee that the day I release Joomla 4, like 2 days later, someone will release the alpha for Bootstrap 5, and I'm just going to facepalm. It's kind of how it goes.
Am I right in thinking that a lot of Bootstrap has been removed from the front end?
The JavaScript, yes. The styling, no.
Okay.
So the only place in the front end that we're using JavaScript in kind of most of the views, and I have a big asterisk saying exclude all the the front end edit views, because the front end edit views obviously still need things. We have tried to keep the Bootstrap JavaScript usage to a minimum, but the CSS styling is still used extensively.
So the answer to Hakan is it will depend on how successfully your template provider updates their templates for Joomla 4.
Yes, but already if they've overridden every single view from Bootstrap 2 to Bootstrap 3, for example, then you're probably in a pretty good place, because you're already overriding Bootstrap. And if you're already overriding Bootstrap, then whether core is shipping with Bootstrap 2 or Bootstrap 4, if you're still stuck on 3, you're still in a happy place. If you're using the default Joomla Bootstrap version, then you're going to have to, your template provider needs to do extra work.
Some of these template providers basically already have a very large custom output that isn't really touching default Joomla at all.
Correct.
And because they're so independent, actually moving from Joomla 3 to Joomla 4 won't impact them much.
Possibly. I mean, it's very hard to say anything with absolute certainty, right? But yes, that's what I'd hope for. And I honestly, until people's template providers start trying it and giving me feedback, I'm never going to know for sure. I mean, anything that outputs HTML that's going to have issues with Bootstrap 2 to 4 migration, you will 100% going to need to upgrade pretty much all your components and probably most of your modules too to get this going. But yeah,
I know you helped us update the Joomla Shack Write framework to work on Joomla 4, and at least to get a working version, if not a perfect version, was pretty quick and easy.
Yeah, and I don't think that's changed since I did that. To answer the follow-up question in chat about why we don't give people a chance to choose the Bootstrap version they want to use, the main reason is it ends up in a stringy list of dependencies. So different Bootstrap versions have different jQuery compatibilities. Different jQuery compatibilities will affect how some of the JavaScript libraries versions we can use. Core, if it gives people an ability to choose, would have to start providing templates for that thing. And it's really non-trivial. If we started in Joomla 1.0 and then kept upgrading, once we're in Joomla 3.9.16, then we upgrade to Joomla 4, will we have issues with the content? What do you mean by with the content? No, it should still be seamless the way that 2 to 3 to 4 was. We have in 3, so we're actually not going to support 3.9 to 4. We're only going to support 3.10 to 4. And there's a reason for that, which is multi-purpose. One of the biggest is that we've expanded the scope of Joomla Update in 3.10, and I can show you that in a couple of minutes. That looks at the extensions you've got installed and will try and tell you whether they are Joomla 4 compatible or not. And also it makes it easier for us because there's a known start point for everyone who's upgrading. Everyone has to go via 3.10. So we know that they've already got all the old J3 removed files removed. They've got all the database upgrades in between versions applied and all that kind of thing. So we're only going to support 3.10 to 4. But yeah, articles and database tables and data and stuff there's not actually that many changes. There's a few tweaks here and there. The biggest thing that we're going to have to change as a database thing is we're moving Finder to Unicode collation in the database, which basically means we're going to nuke Finder indexing as a one-off thing. You'll have to re-index your content in Smart Search, but that is the biggest thing.
So 3.10 is almost like a halfway house in between Joomla 3 and Joomla 4?
Correct. And the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to backport some select parts from a development side of Joomla 4 into 3.10, even if it's a bit dirty, so that to make it easier for extension developers to support one version that supports 3.10 and 4 at the same time, and try and ease that process so that it's hard to upgrade when you've got to simultaneously update some of your extensions. So the aim being is to try and have, people can have one version which without huge amounts of trouble can support 3.10 and 4 at the same time.
Cool. So we're going to have about, say, 10 minutes left. We don't want to take up your entire day, George. I know you're busy. So I'm going to run through a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Of course. One thing just to note is I've got the API up on my screen that I'm sharing right now. So this is what the API looks like.
So question from Adam. I build my own templates. I use Bootstrap 4, and I've been adding namespacing to all my layout overrides. Is there anything else I can or should do to make the transition as seamless for my clients as possible? So Bootstrap 4, and he's adding namespacing.
Sure.
Could you quickly, for a layman, explain what namespacing is and if there's anything Adam should keep in mind?
Sure. So namespacing isn't actually essential to, the first thing I'll say is it's not essential to namespace your extension for it to work on Joomla 4. We recommend that everybody, when they get to Joomla 4, only does the namespacing. But if you're keeping if you have an extension that's going to work on 3.10 and 4 at the same time, you do not need to namespace your extension. It'll be much easier for you if you don't actively. In terms of what namespacing is, I can quickly give you a demonstration and I'll explain why it is useful. So namespacing is like dividing your code up into different segments. So you can see that I define a namespace at the top of my file in my code editor here, and that basically says where the code is located. And the reason that this is useful and the difference between Joomla 3 and Joomla 4 is that in Joomla 3, all controllers and models and views have the same class name. You can get conflicts in between your class names when you're trying to call things. And especially already in Joomla 3, this caused some issues in terms of config references its backend to submit data. And in Joomla 4, when we introduced the API, and a lot of the API references the backend models for processing, validating, and storing data, we needed to be able to basically give a fixed known state. And that fixed known state is basically by using namespaces. So that even though we have Ajax controller as a class name in a dozen different places, they're all in different namespaces. They all can be referenced with a unique value. So that's what namespacing is. In terms of other things he needs to do, I'd say that namespacing and Bootstrap 4 are the two biggest things. The only other thing, if you're trying to make sure you've got a difference between J3 and J4, is just to keep making sure you're not using deprecated stuff. We've tried to mark nearly all the stuff as we can as deprecated ahead of time. So it should be easy for you to start working your way through your code and as much as possible migrating away from the deprecated functions to reduce the amount of stuff you have to do when J4 eventually comes out.
I guess, George, just to elaborate on a lot of my overrides, I'll use, that I had before, it was using JText. And I know that with Bootstrap 4 now, it's removed the J in front of the text. So I use that for that or JFactory or any of those. Are you saying that if I upgrade a client site from 3 to 4, I'm not going to have to worry about that, only if I'm starting fresh from 4?
Okay, so for using the library functions, that's absolutely fine. You can absolutely use the namespaced versions. It will still work in J4 without the namespaced versions. Pretty much the one exception to that is the string package because of PHP 7 compatibility things. But basically, all the old names will continue to be classed alias throughout Joomla 4. From Joomla 5, we'll remove them. But yes, it's absolutely fine if you're supporting 3.10 and 4 at the same time to have a to use the library's namespace. It's just your extensions themselves, whether they're namespaced, is something you should do when you're only going to support 4.0 only.
All right, perfect. Thank you for clearing that up.
Nice.
Cool. George, I have a related question from your friendly neighborhood troll in London. He's seen an option in the back end, perhaps in templates, which will tell you if your template overrides are up to date. Is that right?
Yeah, that's one of our features. That was, this one, overrides are up to date. This is something that came out of a GSOC project several years ago, I'm afraid now, probably like...
Google Summer of Code, right?
Yeah, Google Summer of Code 2017, I want to say. Yeah, so that's a nice feature that we've now integrated into J4. So when Joomla does upgrades, you can see which of your overrides need updating.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
Cool. Question from Hakan. Sorry if I missed this answer earlier. When you upgrade, do you expect any issues with components and extensions?
From 3.9 to 3.10, no. From 4, yes, obviously we've removed lots of deprecated code, and the reason for that is that we want to basically document a defined way of doing things, like one true way, so to speak, rather than having one way that's active and 2 deprecated ways that kind of work but shouldn't, and that kind of thing. So as long as your components aren't using deprecated functionality, no. If components are using deprecated functionality, then yeah, they're going to have issues. The other thing is that obviously the Bootstrap 2 to Bootstrap 4 thing, generally people don't override the backend, so there's going to have to be some work extension developers will have to do to have basically one view that they show in 3.10 that's using Bootstrap 2 and one view they show in Joomla 4 that's using Bootstrap 4. But those are the only 2 real things, and one of them is eminently solvable now, and which is the don't use deprecated functionality. And then the second is, which is a bit more tricky, but it's still eminently achievable, is, yeah, Bootstrap 2 and Bootstrap 4 in your views.
So you talked a little bit about different versions of Bootstrap having different dependencies. When it comes to jQuery, do you know which version will ship with Joomla 4?
3, whatever the latest 3 version is. There's no jQuery 4 as far as I know. I mean, jQuery is on a slow fizzle out. That also comes with a caveat that Bootstrap 5 doesn't come, because Bootstrap 5 drops jQuery in its entirety.
Okay, so Bootstrap is going through some major changes with its JavaScript.
Correct. Bootstrap 5 restructures to remove jQuery as a dependency, and then if that comes out in time, and that's a big if, because I suspect it probably won't, then there may be a piece of work to decide whether or not we still want to ship jQuery, because there hasn't been releases in a long, long time. And whether it's actually useful for Joomla, bearing in mind that it's going to take people another year to migrate, and then there's most Joomla versions stick around for at least 5 years. We have to be slightly forward-thinking and less kind of based in the present.
So Andrew, Ed, Brian, the rest of you guys who are asking questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and jump on with George if you need to. A question from Ed. With migrate.js not being supported, what workarounds are there for extensions that require or use migrate? If a developer forces a migrate load, how many loads do migrate support? That's not something I'm familiar with, so I read it in a kind of a very misunderstanding the question way, I think. Ed, if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to make some more sense out of that than I did.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. George, the migrate.js, I understand, is not going to be supported with Joomla 4, correct?
Good question. I don't actually remember the answer off the top of my head. I don't think so is the answer, but I might be wrong.
Yep, I believe it's not based on my testing.
Okay, then probably not.
The thing is, I've got, and again, this is a personal thing, but I've got almost 8 extensions that require migrate. I know it's old code, but my extensions are free, and I don't want to put a lot of extra time into it that I already have. But they're popular extensions. They're going to break with Joomla 4.
Sure, but my understanding is that migrate was about guaranteeing you backwards compatibility to jQuery 1.6 or 7. If we jump to 3, I don't think it's going to provide you J3 back to 1.7. My understanding is that the J3 3 will migrate gives you migrate back to 2 and 1.9. I don't think it gives you back to 1.7.
Okay, because the testing I've done is that as soon as I load migrate, my extensions work. And my question is, how many other developers are going to load their own version of migrate before it starts breaking things like jQuery did between 2.5 and 3?
Sure. I'm happy to look into it. Submit me an issue on the issue tracker, and I'm more than happy to look into that.
Okay.
George,
I noticed in a lot of my testing outside of my extensions, George, that I tested about 100 plus extensions, and all 100 broke.
That doesn't particularly surprise me because a lot of people use deprecated things.
Yeah. And again,
we've been reaching out to people. We've tried to do our best. We do what we can.
Yeah. I understand. I understand. You guys got to move forward. It's just that there's an awful lot of backward compatibility that people are going to be complaining about. You know that.
I do know that. But yeah, the problem is right now is that it's really hard right now for people to onboard with Joomla because we're also so far behind the curve.
Oh, sure.
As a CMS, the code has to be recognizable to people from outside the CMS for it to be useful. It's a really tricky balancing act, and it's by far the hardest bit of my job as release lead is to decide what needs to get dropped and what needs to stay for backwards compatibility reasons. And I don't pretend that I've got the answer. I've made the right decision in every case. It would be stupid to claim that I did. So this is what I mean about starting. I need extension developers to start testing the product because we are getting towards beta. We're getting towards that final version. And for example, the jQuery migrate thing is absolutely the kind of thing that I want to be hearing about now so that I can do something about it now.
So now is the perfect time before we're too close to launch to get people like Ed chipping in on the issue queue and seeing how they can reduce some of these potential issues when Joomla 4 comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now's a really good time. I don't think there's going to be any more significant changes at this point. The only significant change that might come is related to workflow, but that won't affect other extensions.
Cool. George, I have a question, and I think we'll probably make this the final question depending on what else comes in and how long this one takes. But a question from Olivier, who I know is a prolific extension developer. He has a question about all the options for extensions. In Joomla 3, they're often always done vertically with tabs to distinguish the different sections. It seems as if Joomla 4 will now be going horizontal through a grid approach. Olivier, feel free to unmute yourself and chip in on this. He has some questions about organizing the different options for extensions and the best way to approach that.
Yes. Hi, George. I'm using. I've tried jQuery Easy in Joomla 4, and I have a lot of options in the plugin. And actually, I do have a lot of sections and titles, subtitles, and all goes well when it goes vertically. But now that I have the grid for in Joomla 4, things are going horizontally and flowing depending on the size of the window. And that makes it hard to understand what's going on with the parameters and if they connect with each other or not. And I was wondering if there is, I've noticed you can do subsections already with field sets, but I don't know if there is any other way of putting your options together in a nice way.
Oops. Okay. So to answer your question, I mean, okay, so first of all, I'll show what he's talking about, I guess. Where are we here?
I don't know if I can share my screen, by the way.
Wait, did I share the wrong window? I did. Bear with me. Stop. Share. Come on. This one. Share that one. I love how it shows me the wrong tab. One sec. This one. Is this sharing Chrome now with a list of tabs?
Yes. Yeah, we can see the tabs, the options organized in a different way now.
Cool. So you're talking about the fact it goes left to right rather than vertically down, correct?
Yes, and how can I explain that? It can be difficult for people, especially for languages that are like Arabic and that read from a different side, or Japanese or all those languages. When you have an ordering that's vertical, you don't have any difficulty understanding that the parameters are linked to each other from top to bottom. But then when you start going left to right or right to left, then you lose the connection between the parameters. If they are like too connected with each other and you don't really know what's going on, understand what's going on. It makes it harder to read. I don't know how to explain really. If I could, is there a way to share screens?
I kind of understand what you're saying about top to bottom, but I guess my answer is it's for us, it's about trying to make efficient use of screen space. If you've only got one option per row and you're doing that vertically, then you end up with utilizing huge amounts of screen space. And so us going left to right is purely just a matter of trying to better use the screen space that we have available to us.
I totally understand that. It makes totally perfect sense in the project. It just makes it harder especially for modules and plugins, because in the administration, in a component, you can actually decide what you want to do with your parameters and how you can put them together, group them, or whatever. But in a module or plugin section, you don't really have that flexibility of putting your parameters together.
Sure, but in a plugin, everything still is vertical, I think. At least for Tiny it is. Thought that was pretty much the same thing. Oh, okay, so in the advanced section it doesn't. Okay, interesting.
And it actually depends on what the size of your window, and obviously, but.
Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure that on small windows we do have it vertical because you can only fit one per row anyway.
Yeah, it does work. Yeah.
It's only on the larger screens.
Yeah, sometimes you also want the parameter to take the whole width of the screen.
Yeah, but I think you can still do that just with the width parameter. I think. Pretty sure if you just use the size of the input. If you set a larger size, it's going to take up more space. I don't think it's ingrained that way.
I haven't experimented with that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, George, thank you so much for all your work on Joomla 4 and for taking some time to talk with us about it.
Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thanks, George.
And any feedback like that, feel free to please dump it on the tracker with some examples. Like, never going to pretend that I'm not going to be a brutal dictator and close some of them down if there's no easy way of solving them. But you can't say that it wasn't a conscious decision and it was some accidental thing.
You don't come across
a
as
lot of them probably
brutal
will get
dictator,
fixed.
George.
No, I need to get a spear to have in my hand when I do these sessions.
Cool. So we're expecting Joomla 4 beta in the next few weeks. Now's a great time if you guys have seen anything.
Probably to a month and a half is probably more realistic, but yeah.
Okay. And now is a great time for anyone on the call to jump in if they see something that they think should be improved or could be changed. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. We are going to try and hold these every Thursday at this time for so long as we're all in lockdown. Some of you guys were asking about my nose. I managed to get beaten up by my kids in the swimming pool. They used to be little tiny 3-4-year-olds that I could beat up easily. Now they're nearly as big and strong as me and they can beat me up. So I think we're all going a little crazy and having bumps and taking lumps as we're stuck indoors. And so we're going to try and do these every Thursday to keep you guys company. I see quite a few developers and quite a few Joomla experts on this call. We will need some people to speak over the next few weeks. So if that's you, please feel free to volunteer. As you've seen today, it doesn't have to be too formal. If you have a topic you're comfortable just batting back and forth with people, then we'd love to have you speak. Drop me an email, steve@joomlashack.com. And for those of you guys that just prefer to listen and chat, we'll hopefully see you next Thursday. Thanks, everyone, and good luck staying sane as we're all locked inside our houses.